So in that first step process, we're going to start with the regulators. So on the regulators, they're both styled DIN versions is what we have. We've chose to use the H50s for this particular assembly. They work quite well. We're also using both Halo second stages when we put it together. The hose lengths we chose for this video, you'll see is going to be a 40-inch backup rake hose, generally 32. Even 30-inch is perfectly fine and acceptable. And then we're going to use 15-inch inflator hoses for the corresponding. We have two inflator hoses. One will go from the dry suit to the first stage. The other one will go to the wing or the side mount system and also the first stage. You need two inflations. If you're diving in just wetsuit, you don't need two of them. You just need one. So you can determine what side you want that on based off your instructor and your agency. Then finally, we go into a 7-foot hose that wraps all the way around us. We use that on the primarily right side because it's right side dominant for dealing with the safety side for diving. So we hand that off in a safety scenario, always with the right hand. Finally, we're going to finish it off with two high pressure hoses. So the hose lengths we use there are going to be 9 inches when we get done using it. These are called lollipops, an acronym that's used in a lot of different fields. So it's going to be a lollipop gauge with a small little pressure gauge on it. The H50 first stage is the one we're going to start with. Simple enough. I kind of have this set up in a configuration already. The first stage will be sitting here that we'll apply the hoses to. With the H50s, I like using these for the environmentally sealed aspect, especially going through cave exploration. We're crawling through a lot of different sediment and silt as we need to explore further and further. So we can get a lot of silt into these if we're not careful with it. H75s work just as well, but I choose the environmentally sealed ones for that purpose. So we're going to go in and we're going to start with the inflator hose. Most of the time on a inflator, when it comes to actually using the side mount versions of these, we're going to drop these straight down. So we're going to have an inflator coming straight off the cylinder itself, playing into place. So the inflator hose will come straight down. We also have what's called the 7-foot hose as we start using it as well, and then the high pressure hose when we look at that one too. So in different configurations, you can have this set up in different areas when we start looking at it. Generally, the high pressure hose for us can either sit backwards or it can sit forwards. In our case, we're actually going to have the high pressure hose and the 7-foot hose running the same direction. And because we're limited on the ports on this particular first stage, we're going to have the inflator hose for this first stage actually running up where we need to it. And there's a reason behind that when we start looking at the different configurations for these. So for this particular instance, we're going to run short hose, so our inflator hose will run off to the bottom. These screw into place, nice and easy, nice and controlled. And then what we have is the Halcyon multi-tool that's actually cut to fit our hoses. We can come in and actually lock these down. Doesn't have to be overly tight, just snug. The dive shop and also the facility can help you assemble all these and do a bench test on these as well when they're all said and done. Same thing with the high pressure hose. We come in, assemble the high pressure hose the same way. Screws into place. Different size wrench for this one that's still on the multi-tool. We can come in and lock this down easy, okay? O-ring seal helps out with a lot of those components. Then we're going to move to our backup rake hose. So this is going to come up over our head when we start using it a little bit more. So this is why we're actually assembling this to the top portion of this particular first stage. We have another port here that we need, but we don't want it to run down and then have to twist back up. As the side mount system is in place, we have everything locked in. This would actually have to travel down and up to get around our head. So we'll run it to the top so it comes over nice and easy when we start using it. So once we tighten and secure that hose down itself, we can lock it into place same way. And then we're going to move on to assembling the components to go onto each one of these hoses. So high pressure hose, when we start looking at it, we have our high pressure hose and our high pressure SPG gauge, which in this case is a smaller stage gauge with a spool already in place. Good practice when dealing anytime with spools is making sure you're using a crystal lube to be able to lube up the O-rings before they get put into place. We're going to drop this into the hose first because there's a little bit less distance to travel there. And then we're going to screw the high pressure hose or high pressure gauge right on top of it. Nice and simple. Bottoms out, so it secures that spool in place. And then we come in again with our multi-tool and just little snug is all it needs to be. We still have a good O-ring seal when we start looking at it. So now when we look at the configuration when it sits onto the face of the cylinder, which we'll show you in a little bit, these hoses are running straight down. This one's going to come in, connect to an inflator, whether it's the dry suit or the side mount system itself. And then this top hose is going to be your backup rake hose. So now when we look at the backup rake hose, we come in and same principle, actually with an O-ring seal. Little bit of crystal lube does help, but it's not necessarily necessary for this particular attachment. So we come in, tighten this up. Nice and controlled, nice and easy, and then we're going to just button that down slightly. So that does almost a complete setup on that one first stage. This first stage would actually be riding on my left side for the cylinder. The last component you'll see that you can come in and do is, because it's a backup reg going around the neck, you can come in and do a bungee loop around the neck, or around the second stage itself where the mouthpiece sits. Generally, we like to have one zip tie on the mouthpiece, always holding it tight to the housing, and then a secondary zip tie with knotted bungee so it doesn't come off and slide off at all when we pull on it, is locking down the necklace bungee itself. So now when this is physically on the cylinder and we get ready to actually implement everything, this will come around, sit around the head, and then we'll have a bungee sitting right here for the final purposes that we're going to be using for this particular setup. Okay, so now we're going to move into the second setup, which is going to be onto the right side of the cylinder the same way. In this particular case, I'm actually going to be running all three hoses out the bottom. So the high pressure hose and also the inflator get set up the same way. We can already screw those into place for the high pressure port versus the low pressure ports. Because these ports are so close to one another, they both work for either aspect. It all depends on where you want that 7-foot hose to route and come out. So for me, there is a high performance low pressure port on this particular first stage. So for the high performance side, I'd like my long hose to be on that one. So we're going to reserve that for the 7-foot hose as it's my primary reg. Same thing, come in and just button down these hose fittings so they're locked in place where we need them. Nice and secure. Pressure gauge the same way. We're going to first set the spool inside the hose itself, and then crystal lube on both O-rings. We're going to lock down the pressure gauge so it's sitting where it needs to. Come in nice and controlled, and then a nice little button down on that particular hose the same way. Finally, we move to the 7-foot hose. Okay. On the 7-foot hose, of course, you got a little bit of extra length on this particular hose, but if we're having to share it, we can have that for the hose itself, especially if we're in an overhead environment or diving with a nice little underwater cave or wreck exploration team. We want to make sure that we have enough hose to be able to do single file. So we choose a 7-foot hose for that purpose. It comes in our kit. If you're doing a lot of open water diving, that hose could change depending on your instructor and the training you're going to go through. So now in this case, we actually have all three hoses as they're locked onto the cylinder. Move this 7-foot hose real quick. They're all routed straight down. The reason we like to have the 7-foot hose routed down is because we're not going to be using it right away, so it's going to curl lengthwise along the cylinder and come back up. If we mounted it up here like on the other one that's around our neck, then it would have to bow and come all the way down. And we're only losing probably about 2 inches as we donate it, going from this position, which isn't a lot. Makes it more streamlined in the water so we have better control over it. Final step for this particular regulator is now going to be the second stage. The second stage on this one, same principle as before. There's an O-ring seal that actually seals it all together. We can put these together. Remember, taking these through a bench test with your dealer or reg technician is going to be ideal once they're all set up to make sure you're getting fine-tuned breathing before you take these out on your next open water adventure. Tighten that down so it's nice and controlled. So now you'll see one other difference along with this hose is we have a clip already attached to this particular hose. I had this set up prior to this. There's a knot tying video you can watch to be able to put clips on. But this is generally a hand's width away, so I can get a good grip. When I'm having to take this out to switch, I can clip this off and get rid of it if I need to. Otherwise, this just hangs out here, and we don't necessarily like that. We like to have it secure and clipped off. So having one clip on this side versus the bungee that was on the other is important. So this goes through both setups of how to assemble a regulator set using with side mount. One of many variations that are out there. Hopefully you found this useful. We're going to move to the second step process, which is now the side mount system.